Welcome to TrulyFit, the online fitness marketplace connecting pros and clients through unique fitness business software.
Jackson, thanks so much for joining the TrulyFit podcast. Why don't you give the audience and the listeners a little background on who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure, Steve. Yeah, I work as an oral historian, a podcaster, an audio engineer, and also as a musician. So I wear a lot of hats, as you know, with podcasting. There's a lot of things you got to do. I grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up a big sports fan and a fan of music. And I live near San Antonio now with my wife and our two rescue dogs. And yeah, it's great.
My wife is from Madison, so I've been in Wisconsin a lot visiting her family and been around there. Beautiful place, great sports city, obviously.
Yeah, that's actually my hometown. Yeah, so I grew up going to Badger games as a kid. I met Elroy Hirsch, NFL Hall of Famer, when I was in third grade on a field trip when we went to the Badger Stadium, Camp Randall there on a field trip. So yeah, and one unique thing about Madison, it's the only North American city built on an isthmus.
Interesting.
Yeah, there you go. A little trivia for the TrulyFit crew.
And if anyone's looking to go to a college football game and they haven't been to Camp Randall, I suggested. I've been to close to about 25 stadiums now, and it was certainly in the top 6 or 7 experiences in college football. So
yeah, it's great. It's great, especially with the band and doing the fifth quarter, and yeah, just a great atmosphere.
Yeah, and in college football atmospheres, you have a little bit of everything. So you can go to places. I went to West Virginia University. Morgantown is a little bit more rowdy and ruckus as far as the fans yelling at you. And you can go to somewhere like Texas A&M where all the fans are gentle and light, and they're a little bit more welcoming. Camp Randall has a good mixture of both, right? They have the student sections going crazy. They're doing jump around, but they also have very welcoming adults. And I think it balances college football in a good way.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I even worked there as an usher as a teenager to get into games for free. That was my thinking. I wasn't thinking about making money. I was thinking about how can I get into games for free. So I worked as an usher, and yeah, had a lot of experience working with the fans, and yeah, didn't have any negative experiences at all.
Tell us first a little bit about your book and what maybe gave you sort of the impetus to write your book.
Yeah, the first book was The Game Before the Money, Voices of the Men Who Built the NFL. It's an oral history of pro football. I interviewed players who played pro football between the 1930s and the 1970s. And that was published by the University of Nebraska Press. I really felt it was important to document the lives of these people who built the league into what it is today, and who helped build football to the cultural phenomenon that it is. I mean, if you compare it, maybe to Hollywood is maybe more popular than football right now, but as an eminent source for the American culture, football is, very, very high up there. So, and what else is also interesting is, pro sports is one of those rare professions where you get a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different personalities, and yet they're all able to come together and go towards one goal as a team.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think, today our conversation is going to be shaped around kind of leadership and how that plays into sports and football and how that can cross over into professions and things of that nature. But, being one of these sort of revolutionary athletes, let's call them, who started before there was money in it, you needed that sort of leadership from a coach's perspective, from a quarterback's perspective, from a player's perspective, because you were rallying guys to do these very remarkable feats and tasks for no compensation. More or less, right? So you needed a bigger rallying cry. Today it's much easier to go into a huddle and say, you're making $3 million a year, you better block that guy, as opposed to, you're protecting me. We're doing this as a unit. And you really need sort of a central authority leadership figure. And I think, you know, I'm not saying we've lost that with time, but obviously as times get easier, leadership may lessen, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and a lot of times if you look at successful groups or successful teams, a lot of times it's not really even the financial motivation, or it's the motivation not to let my teammates down. A lot of players would talk about that. Walt Garrison, in particular, from the Cowboys, he would talk about, like, I wanted my teammates to know that I was a good teammate. You know, in separate reading, I read a couple of biographies of the guys that Band of Brothers was based off of, and fighting in Europe. And none of them really talked about democracy or American ideals throughout the book. They talked about their friends and defending their friends and making sure their friends made it out okay with them. So
that's a great point. And when you talk to either veterans of the war or retired players, and you say, what do you miss? It's always the camaraderie between the guys that they miss more so than anything else. They don't, you know, that's what they talk about, sort of the locker room environment is what they miss.
Yeah, exactly. And succeeding, you know, not only by yourself and for yourself, but, you know, with somebody else. And I think trainers can take that, you know, also, because you're working with someone else towards a goal to make them stronger, to make them feel better about themselves. And, you know, when it's important to you, it becomes important to the other person as well. And it just kind of create that synergy. And I think on, you know, teams of a greater number of people, that grows into a powerful force.
Completely. Yeah, you're right. And then, you know, there are actually some fitness mediums that stole that, CrossFit in particular, where they use very, very much the same ideal where we're competing, right? So CrossFit has competitions themselves, but even within the training for it and the classes, they have competitions where you have to meet certain goals, or you have to do a certain amount of repetitions during a time, and everyone's working together and you're cheering each other on, and it's very difficult. And they do these, you know, they're essentially classes where they're grouping that together. And I think it is important for people to know. And I'm not even talking about from like a marketing perspective to like just get more money, but this is from a achieving your goal perspective. It's important to make sure that you have other people around you who are pushing you and you're pushing them.
Yeah, exactly. And that creates, you know, a lot of synergy for everybody to succeed.
So I want to shift conversation here and talk a little bit about the leadership. Typically, we think of coaches and quarterbacks when we're talking about football in these leadership roles. Is there anybody that comes to mind right away, and why do they come to mind for you?
Yeah, there are a lot, you know, of course, Bart Starr and Vince Lombardi with the Packers in the 60s, they kind of set a standard for that. And you know, Johnny Unitas with that great comeback in the 1958 NFL championship, he comes to mind. And other coaches, you know, Paul Brown, certainly, Tom Landry, Chuck Noll, and even in today's game, you know, Bill Belichick, you know, definitely fits in that mold.
Is leadership the central characteristic that is setting these guys apart? Is it just leadership? Is it knowledge? Is it a combination of the two? And if you believe it is leadership, is there like an anecdote from one of these coaches you can describe to show their leadership ability?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you asked that, because all of those people generally had different personalities. And even Lombardi said, you know, leaders are made, they're not born. And I think all of us who are leaders, you know, and I think everybody is a leader in some regard, and we can talk about that more, but we learn as we go. We learn our leadership skills as we go and as we mature. You know, so I think two things that really stand out. And when I asked Bart Starr, you know, what leadership meant to him, you know, a lot of it was commitment to the cause. And a lot of it was based on setting the standard. He would say that Coach Lombardi said, we're not going to be a good team. We're not going to focus on being good. Just good is not good enough for our team. We have to be excellent. And when you think about that in whatever you're doing, whether you're training, whether it's form on an exercise, are you doing a good job of it, or are you doing an excellent job of it? Are you doing a good job of communicating, or are you doing an excellent job? That makes a big difference. Is this a good workout, or is it an excellent workout? Which would you rather do? And translated into football, that's what made the Packers a little bit better than the rest of the teams, I think.
And,
at that time.
And running a team is a business, right? So the Packers are a business in a sense, and personal training is a business. And I think that also comes into play here. It's because you're facing other businesses. And if you do all the things a little bit better, that 1% better, you're going to be more successful. And I think that plays into it from a leadership role, but also from sort of a CEO role, let's call it, which essentially is supposed to be, the leader of the company, or the football team. In this case, it's the head coach, but we're, as personal trainers, all individual CEOs of either our clients, or maybe our group fitness class, or maybe we own an actual gym, a small gym or a large gym. And it is important that we do those things, like you said, one step above the competition, because there is a finite amount of money and people working towards personal training. So the better job you do, the more successful you're going to be.
Yeah, that's very true. And then the other side, that we were talking about is commitment to the cause. And it's like, what cause are you committed to? If you're training somebody, is your main cause to make them better? I mean, I've had two great trainers that I've worked with, and I've worked with several trainers, like most people, but the two that really stand out, they were really committed to making me better, and to make sure that I learned to exercise properly, and that I was lifting properly, and that I was eating properly. And they really, supported me. And I could feel that they were committed to that cause. If you're committed just to the marketing and the salesmanship of it, people can they can feel that too, and it kind of tones it down a little bit.
I couldn't agree more. And we talk about that a lot here. People are intuitive. They're going to know if you're just trying to scale basically and get as many clients as you can. There's a big difference between the trainers who message their clients on a weekend and say, hey, how's everything going? Are you feeling okay? Are you still sore from last workout? Let me know if I can do anything. The trainers who know their client's dog's name, right? They might know both of your rescue dog's name and your wife's name, and where you got your dogs from. And that, you every Thanksgiving, you travel back to Madison, or what those little things that you do matter in the grand scheme of things. And no different with coaches that know their players, or they can tell that one of their players are having a difficult time, and they come over and say, hey, Dan, I know this has been a tough week for you. Talk to me. What's going on? And that makes a heck of a lot of difference when you're in the battle and the trenches, fighting for, a win.
Yeah. It creates that glue and that relationship that makes you want to work harder, not just for yourself, but for your trainer and for the team.
So you mentioned it before a little bit, that the training, that leadership styles are very different. So you have someone like an Eli Manning, who I guess you can maybe consider him a leader or not. We can talk about that, but he won multiple Super Bowls. He was at the helm of the New York Giants. And then you have somebody who's a little bit more vocal, like a Drew Brees, who's in the middle, leading the chants with the offense and the defense, and he's more of a vocal leader, but he's also a winner. And you do it different ways. I know you've interviewed Dick Vermeil, who is sort of known for being more emotional and crying with his players and really talking about how much he loves them, as opposed to maybe a more of a hard-nosed coach like a Mike Tomlin. These people are all winners. They're all leaders. So is it that you can just use your skill set to be a leader, and that there is no one particular characteristic that lets you be a leader?
Yeah. Leaders come from all different kinds of backgrounds, and they have a lot of different approaches. Dick Vermeil, yeah, sure, he's emotional. He's also, the hardest working man in show business in one way. I mean, that guy, he would sleep in his office. He was 24/7, work as hard as we can all the time. If we work, 22 hours a day, we're going to be a better football team than if we work 21 hours a day. Then there's a coach like Bum Phillips, from the Houston Oilers, also a very successful coach. Kind of was like, okay, guys, how are you feeling today? If you guys aren't feeling it today, we're going to take it easy. If you need to rest, do that. You guys are all professionals. I'm going to let you guys decide what you guys need to do. That style works well too. The key is you got to have players buy in. You got to have people buy in. And that's even in a one-on-one training situation. You got to have your client buy in. And you got to have success at something. If all your clients are out of shape, or if I'm working with a trainer and I'm still out of shape, I'm not buying in. If a football team, has the same coach for 2-3 years and they've only won a couple of games, they're not going to buy in. So, and some of that stuff is not within the control of the coach. You also have to kind of have the certain personalities that match that sort of style.
Yeah, and that was a great way to relate that to training. There's multiple ways in which you can reach a client's goal. You may work with me, Jackson, or another trainer. We both may be successful with you, but through different mediums, right? Maybe I decide that the way I do things are more body weight and bands, and the other trainer does things with more dumbbells and cardio equipment. It doesn't necessarily matter as long as we get to that goal. We're knowledgeable in getting you there, and we can show you that we are successful in doing it. Those are the things that matter. And I think that works both in sports and in fitness. And when you find people that are this is a very college football term, dyed in the wool, and there's only one way to go, right? That's where you should typically run away, because there isn't one way to do a lot of things, right? There's wrong ways to do it, but there's typically not one right way. You watch Phillip Rivers throw a football and you watch Tom Brady throw a football. They don't throw a football the same. That doesn't mean they both are not great quarterbacks, but their arm angles don't change who they are as leaders and who they are as quarterbacks. They just do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's true. It's also important to remember, like, though, as you are, if you've got a certain style that works for you, you can stay with that style, and that's kind of your, you talk about Big Ten smash mouth football. That's kind of their brand of football. That's what works. The Big 12, they air it out. That's what works. So you need to be flexible to your clients' needs, of course, but you also can't stray away from who you are, because you're not going to be as good at it. I play guitar really well. But if I tried to pick up like a trumpet, I'm not going to be able to play a trumpet, to get a gig. That's not serving anybody well if I try to play a trumpet.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you need a base, for lack of a better term. You need something that kind of defines you, the things that you do best. In the personal training world, we usually have like a general base, and then we have like a niche of some sort. A little bit of everything, but you're known for one thing in particular, right? So for me, a lot of my early career, I was known for working with seniors. So they're a lot more difficult. They hand you their health history form, and they have a lot of things going on wrong, right? They have a bilateral hip replacement. They have diabetes. They're on this medication. They're on that and you have to know all of these things that go on there. And a lot of these things compound. If you're on one thing, how does that react synergistically with another drug? And that was sort of my niche and my window. I can do a little bit of everything, but that was my specialty. And I think, that works in sports, and that works in business as well.
Yeah. People know what they're getting into. And, when teams hire Dick Vermeil, and when players, are playing for, they know what they're in for. and when they're playing for Mike Tomlin, they know what they're in for. And certainly when they were playing for Vince Lombardi or Chuck Noll, they knew that too.
So, Vince Lombardi grew up in Brooklyn, I believe, right? He was coaching in the 1960s. So he grew up, 30, 40, 50 years before that in very tough times, right? You're coming from parents of immigrants from Italy, and you're living in tougher times. Do you think that helps really shape some of these people and who they are more so than now, where it just might be a little bit easier for people to climb to the top? They don't have that sort of difficult background.
Well, I think everybody has their own journey to success. So, but it's certainly, who they are certainly comes through and what they learn along the way. In Lombardi's case, he played college football at Fordham. He's part of the 7 blocks of granite. One of those guys is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So he's always been around successful people. He was an assistant coach with the New York Giants before getting the Packers job. And the other assistant coach on that team was Tom Landry. So he was always around successful people. He worked for Red Blake at Army as an assistant coach. So, and then, a hard scrabble upbringing sometimes helps people, because, maybe they don't take things for granted, maybe, and it helps them in more adverse situations. And so, there are a lot of benefits, and whatever people are good at, generally it's got some tie to their background, that helped them get to that point, or somebody helped them along the way.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also, just want to comment on what you said about Landry. I didn't know that, but I do think that happens a lot in various industries, especially in the fitness industry, where you end up working with someone who is either your boss or your equal, and they go on to do great things. And it's good to be interconnected with these people and keep really good relationships, because, for coaches, let's say, that could be your key, your golden ticket to maybe being an assistant coach. For trainers, that could be your golden ticket to getting hired to a bigger gym. So it's important to maintain professionalism and good relationships within your climb to ascent in your profession.
Oh yeah. And in the music industry, one of the sayings is always, you meet the same people on the way up that you do on the way down. So there's that too. But and it's just good practice, to treat people well and to have good relationships. That's part of being a leader too, taking the leadership and having good relationships. That's an important all around leadership skill.
Yeah. I also think an important leadership skill, and this is going to kind of lead to my next question/statement, is, practice what you preach, and also be good on and off the field, right? You see a lot of these people who, you might be successful on the field, but if you have a lot of issues off the field, it's hard for young men and other people to look up to you as a leader. So, in college football, you have someone like Kirk Ferentz, who's been in Iowa for 20 plus years now, never has any proprieties off the field, graduates kids, does all these things proper. Is there a lack of that? Are we just looking for winners now? Or do you think that this maybe is something that should be changed a bit, and we should be looking for more people like this?
Well, and before Ferentz at Iowa, they had Hayden Fry, so they've had 2 coaches since, the late 1970s, I think. So, and my point there is consistency of leadership. That's key to building a successful program, company. That's really helpful too. I think at the college level and the high school level, I think character development and developing people who they are, that's really important. And I do think that, overall, from the coaches with whom I've spoken, they put that as a pretty high priority, if not the highest. I know Mac Brown, the University of Texas head coach, when they won the national championship with Vince Young. In the locker room afterwards, he said, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something akin to, don't let this moment be the highlight of your life. You know, you got your whole life besides this. Don't let this be the biggest moment. And that's a head coach who just won the national championship. And when you get paid to coach, that's, wins and losses on the surface are generally your job. But I think at the college and high school level, I think a lot of coaches are into player development on and off the field. At the pros, I think you're kind of expected to be at a certain level by that point. I know one of Chuck Noll's sayings was, "It's not my job to motivate you. You should already be motivated as a pro football player." Yeah, but there are a lot of different ways to look at it, but I do think that by and large, a lot of coaches are the majority are really into player development, and they know their responsibility is important in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense from a leadership standpoint, where people around you, not that they're doing this for this purpose, but people around you are going to buy in if you care about them from, the full perspective, not just if they gained 150 yards, but also if they're getting A's, if they're doing the right things in the community and those sorts of things. And again, that plays into the personal training. We're also, how our clients sleep, how their relationships are, how they do at work, all of these things factor into working out. So much so that, I have sort of like a check down list that when I'm working with young personal trainers, of things to do to make sure they're getting their clients the best workout. For example, if you're getting off of work at 5:00 and then you tell me, Steve, I want to work out at 6:30. I go home first, relax, and then come. I say no chance, because there's such a high probability that you're going to go home and then get a phone call or open the fridge and go, you know what, I'm out of eggs. I got to run to the store, or something is going to happen. Or you just lay on the couch and go, oh, there's the 1967 Packer history is on the NFL Network. And before you know it, you cancel on Steve. So, and even if I'm getting that money from you, even if you cancel and I get that money, that's still not worth it to me, because I want your progress. So I say, not a chance. If you're 15 minutes away and you get off of work at 5, I'll see you at 5:15. And those things are important, and to check in with their clients. Are they sleeping properly? Are they doing all those things? And making sure that you have a well-rounded approach to getting them to their goals, and not just the 1 hour you're working with them, right? The coaches, it's not just the 1 hour they're on the practice field leading the team. It's the other 21 hours that Dick Vermeil is in the office watching film, making sure his players are doing the right things that lead to success.
Yeah, exactly. And, I spoke to Drew Pearson a while back. I was able to interview him for the Texas Sports Hall of Fame podcast, which I also host and produce. And he was talking about Coach Landry looked for 4 things in his players. That was a lot of his criteria, and talent was the 4th. There were other characteristics that he was looking for, and that's important too. And, things like dependability and, just talking about it from a trainer perspective, dependability. If you show up and you do a good job every day, that's even if you're an average trainer, you might get better results from somebody who's fantastic, but isn't as reliable. And you see that in sports a lot, where you get players who might have all this athletic skill, but maybe they're not as reliable. Maybe they're not that great of a teammate. Maybe they're doing some things off the field that are a distraction. Who would you rather have on your team? An above average player who doesn't do that, or, a player who has a tremendous amount of potential, but kind of lets these other things get in the way.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think too, that ties into like the long-term perspective, where if you're going to be good at anything, football or a trainer or health, right? If you're the client trying to be good, you have to have a long-term approach. You can't just be somebody comes in, you're not going to have some wide receiver coach come in and go, I'm going to work with you for a week and get your footwork going, and then I'm going to leave. It's the coaches who are there for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Like you just talked about Iowa having 2 coaches in 45 years that can continue to slowly build you up in the proper way and stay with you. And I think that's an important part of helping clients, helping build your own business. Being a leader is sort of having that long-term approach to, of course, during the way you have short-term goals with your clients, you have short-term goals with your business. But if you don't have that long-term approach, that 5-10 year approach, they're going to sniff that out, and they're going to know that you're not there for them.
Yeah. And I think the college coaches also, and the high school coaches also understand that if they build up better people, they're going to have better success on the field. And, as a trainer, if you build up people, they're going to have better results. People at the gym are going to see the people you're working with, and they're going to see what kinds of people that they are. And, they might want some of that, if you will.
Yeah. That's a big part of it. And I think I've gotten a lot of clients through word of mouth. That's still the best marketing there is, but also just people watching what I do, and then stopping me after a session when I'm not working, or in the hallways at a gym, and saying, hey, I kept my eye out on what you were doing. And I was very intrigued. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you could potentially help me with my problems? And I think always acting in a manner in which somebody's videotaping you, and that you are the CEO, and that you are running a team, or you are running an organization, having that sort of leadership mindset is what makes people good, right? And it's almost like a little insecurity, and being too nonchalant and always doing what you want and not worrying about those things is what will lead to your downfall.
Yeah, complacency. Yeah, definitely.
So we talked a lot about what these leaders can do, that sort of the everyman can do, right? So are there anything else you can think of that maybe some of these leaders in sports do that kind of translates to any profession, or the personal training profession?
Yeah, I definitely think, again, the commitment to the cause is a big one, because if people are looking to you for leadership and they don't see commitment, they're less likely to be committed. It's hard to stay committed when the person who's supposed to be leading you doesn't appear that committed. That's one. And, setting the standard for excellence. If you're a leader and you set a laissez-faire kind of, close enough for rock and roll kind of standard,
yeah,
then that's gonna seep through the group. But if you set a higher standard, and it doesn't matter if your title is manager or your title is, clerk, male clerk, if you set a higher standard, people are going to feed off that. Steve Tasker was a special teams player for the Bills during their AFC championship days in the late 80s and early 90s. And he did such a good job on special teams that it inspired the rest of his teammates to raise up to a higher standard. So
he's a Hall of Famer, right?
He is on the semifinal list.
Okay.
Yeah, as we're speaking now for the 2022 class. Yeah. So I think those are two things. And we're called to lead in different situations. We're called to lead in our family at some point. We're called to lead in our own lives, and we're called to lead in our community. Sometimes, even just somebody asking for directions, there are a lot of different ways to approach that scenario where you're asked to be a guide. It might seem like just a small thing, but if you do a good job and show that you care even in those little things, it's going to grow into, throughout your life. And I think a lot of these athletes who played, for a lot of these great coaches like Lombardi And, I spoke with Leroy Jordan, who got to play for both Bear Bryant and Tom Landry. What they did in small areas, and ended up working in bigger areas. Just because of that foundation that they had, the high standard and a commitment to the cause.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think, again, for trainers to relay that, it's, in our own individual workouts, how meticulous one may be of writing everything down and making sure that, we're getting this amount of cardio in, or this amount of nutrients in, or all of these things. Well, that same sort of dedication needs to be put towards your clients and your business and your client success and all of those things, because like you said, it all carries over. That's all important. And you never know when you're going to have to really motivate your client to do the next thing. And I think, an issue with a lot of the issue that a lot of trainers have, a lot of the young trainers I work with, is they start working with someone. It's 6 months in, maybe that person's met some of their goals, but they probably plateaued. The person's not complaining. So they just carry on, right? I work with you. We meet for an hour. I don't really push anything. You're not complaining. I'm getting my money, and it's over. And I think that creates sort of and this is another podcast that creates sort of a sense of burnout, because you're not working towards something and you're just going through the day to day. And that's a problem. And, unlike coaches who have an ultimate goal, like winning the Lombardi trophy, trainers sometimes don't have that ultimate goal, but you can set one, right? You can set ultimate goals, or at least small goals along the way, to make sure that you don't get complacent, as you said, which is a big problem.
Yeah, and a couple of things, to bring up there. One, when I spoke with the players who played for Lombardi, and I've gotten to speak to maybe half a dozen, almost all of them brought up at some point that Lombardi could tell when a player needed a kick in the pants, so to speak, or needed a hug, And so it's kind of recognizing what your clients need. Do they need a little extra motivation to get to that next level? And the other thing that ties into that is, championship teams, they have everybody watching film, trying to figure out what they do, how to beat them. So the teams that stay on top for the longest amount of time, they adjust. And sometimes you got to adjust people's workouts, when they plateaued. We all know that. I mean, that's basics. Even I'm not a trainer, but I do know my body will get used to something, and I've got to switch it up.
Yeah. But not only that, that's exactly right, but also just from a mental standpoint with your clients, making sure that they're continued to be invested in it by changing things up, right? That nobody wants to be bored. It's the same thing with a coach over and over. You can't just do the same things. You have to keep your players guessing, and you have to do different things for them to make sure that they buy in, and they understand that you're always working in the background towards their betterment, and that you're not just writing out some prescription that you wrote out that you gave to everybody and you're saying, this is what you're going to do. It's like, well, there is no coach that's been doing the same exact thing for 6 years, because someone would have figured it out. That coach would have lost all the games and he would be gone. And there shouldn't be a trainer who's been doing the same exact thing for 6 years with their client, because now their client is not succeeding. They're not involved in it. And they know that the coach or trainer in this case isn't invested in their long-term success, and rather just trying to make a dollar as easy as possible.
Yeah. And I know I wouldn't want to do the same workout for 6 years.
So why don't we tell the audience, Jackson, where they can find your book, where they can listen to your podcasts, and where they can maybe reach out to you directly if they ever have any questions about whether it's football oral history or anything else that you do.
Oh yeah, that's great. A lot of it is centered around thegamebeforethemoney.com.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stuff is there. Even my email address is in my about section. The Game Before the Money podcast is everywhere you listen to podcasts. You can get that. And you can also locate it on the website, which has a lot of great football history articles. It's got links to the Game Before the Money book. Also, the Red, White, and Columbia Blue, Chasing the Dream with the 1979 Oilers book that I wrote a couple of years ago, and my fantasy football winning strategies book. There are links to that too. And also the Houston Oilers documentary that I did called We Were the Oilers, the Love You Blue era. So all that, the products are for sale on Amazon, but if you just want one hub, that would be the gamebeforethemoney.com.
Yeah, and I recommend it. I have not seen the documentary yet. I will certainly do that, but I do recommend all of Jackson's content for those of you who are football fans. And if you're not a football fan and your father or brother or uncle is, send it away to them. It's good stuff, and especially for real diehard football fans, we already know everything about what's going on now. It's important that you learn about the past, because the past repeats itself. And I do think there is unfortunately, there's an era of people who only know basically Dan Marino on, and anything before that, they don't even believe it exists. So it's important to learn about the past.
Yeah, and just the people that made the game what it is, and learning their backgrounds, it's a lot of times very inspiring. And I always say football history is American history. So you learn a lot about our country through hearing the stories of these people.
Yeah, even in sort of, Vince Lombardi, as far as like race relations was concerned, I'm sure you're familiar with this. In the early 60s, when the NFL wasn't necessarily sort of hip to making sure that there wasn't racial profiling, for lack of a better term, Vince Lombardi took that ahead of the game here. So I think when he started with the Packers, there was one African-American player, and by 1967, he had like 13 on the roster, and he was very authoritative with his players, saying, we will not deal with discrimination on this team.
Yeah, there were some coaches who were much more proactive, team owners who were much more proactive in that regard. The Steelers, they had scouts and going to, HBCU schools, scouting talent. I know a guy who scouted for the Colts in the 60s, and he did too, so, and there were other teams that weren't as on board with that. It's interesting to think about, and then, with coaching opportunities too, that's something that's been worked on over the years too. So yeah, and you learn the history of our country a lot of the times, and the kind of the fabric of our country, and the trends through the players' stories.
Jackson, this has been great, very informative. I will link all of your stuff below the podcast. Thank you so much for joining the Truly Fit podcast.
Well, thank you, Steve. I really, really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you having me on. It was a great time.